The recruitment center buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of young humans shuffled through the processing lines. Maya Chen kept her eyes down, watching her worn boots move across the polished floor. Around her, recruits chatted excitedly about joining the Galactic Defense Force, their voices mixing into a hopeful chorus that made her stomach twist. She didn't belong here. Everyone else seemed to know exactly why they'd volunteered. To serve humanity, to see the stars, to prove their worth to the galaxy that had grudgingly accepted Earth into the cosmic community just 5 years ago. Maya had simpler reasons. The military offered 3 meals a day and a place to sleep that didn't involve hiding from debt collectors. Next, the processing officer's voice cut through her thoughts. Maya stepped forward to the scanning station where a tall, blue-skinned Altarian operated the bioanalysis equipment. Most humans still stared at aliens with wonder, but Maya had worked the docks long enough to see plenty of off-worlders. They were just people with different colored skin and extra eyes or tentacles. The scanner hummed as it passed over her body. The Altarian's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as data scrolled across his screen. His expression shifted from boredom to confusion, then to something that might have been alarm. "Run it again," he muttered in accented standard. Maya frowned. "Is something wrong?" "Quiet." The alien's voice was sharp now. He ran the scanner 3 more times, each pass making his blue skin darken to a deeper shade. Finally, he pressed a button that made Maya's processing tablet flash red instead of the usual green. "Station 7, he said without looking at her. "Report to the medical wing." Maya wanted to ask what was happening, but the line behind her was growing restless. She took her tablet and followed the signs, noting how other recruits gave her a wide berth when they saw the red display. Whatever the scanner had found, it wasn't good. Station 7 turned out to be a sterile white room filled with equipment she didn't recognize. A human doctor waited inside, flanked by 2 more Altarians in military uniforms. Their rank insignia indicated high-level officers, the kind who usually dealt with serious problems. Maya Chen, the doctor read from his tablet. 22 years old, no family, no permanent address. "Is that correct?" "Yes, sir." Maya's throat felt dry. "Did I fail the scan somehow?" "On the contrary." One of the Altarian officers stepped forward. "You passed it in a way we've never seen before. I am Commander Vexhai of the GDF Intelligence Division. We need to run some additional tests." The next 4 hours blurred together in a series of increasingly complex examinations. They tested her reflexes, her cognitive abilities, her psychological profile. They drew blood, scanned her brain, and subjected her to simulations that left her feeling drained and confused. Through it all, the officers whispered among themselves in their native language, occasionally glancing at her with expressions she couldn't read. Maya had learned to recognize when powerful people were making decisions about her life without her input. It never ended well for people like her. Finally, Commander Vexhai returned to the room alone. He carried a thick file and wore the expression of someone delivering news that would change everything. "Maya Chen, your test results are unprecedented in the 5 years since humanity joined the Galactic Defense Force." He opened the file and spread several charts across the table. "Your neuroplasticity index is off our measurement scale. Your tactical reasoning scores exceed those of our best strategists. Most remarkably, your stress response patterns suggest an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure." Maya stared at the incomprehensible charts. "I don't understand what any of that means." "It means," Vexhai said carefully, "that you may be the most naturally gifted military mind we've ever encountered. Not just among humans, among any species in the GDF." A bitter laugh escaped her throat. "You're joking? I failed out of high school. I've been living in shelters and working day labor for the past 4 years. I'm nobody special. Perhaps that's exactly why you are special." The commander's tone grew thoughtful. "Tell me, Maya Chen, have you ever been in a truly dangerous situation?" Maya thought about the gang fights in the shelter districts, the times she'd had to talk her way out of trouble with people who would hurt her without a second thought. She thought about the night she'd helped 3 other kids escape from a trafficking ring, using nothing but careful planning and the kind of cold thinking that came when emotions were a luxury she couldn't afford. "A few times," she said quietly. "And how did you respond?" "I survived." The words came out harder than she intended. "I did what needed to be done." Vexhai nodded as if her answer confirmed something important. "Standard military training will begin tomorrow for all recruits. However, you will be following a different path. The GDF has a special program for individuals with your Potential. What kind of program? One that will either make you into the most dangerous weapon humanity has ever produced, or destroy you completely. His four eyes fixed on her with unsettling intensity. There is no middle ground. Maya looked around the sterile room, thinking about the debt collectors, the empty stomach nights, the constant fear that had defined her life. Whatever this program was, it had to be better than going back to the streets. When do I start? She asked. A smile spread across Vexhi's alien features, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. You already have. From this moment forward, your old life no longer exists. You are no longer Maya Chen, unemployed human from Earth's lower districts. You are Candidate 07 and you belong to the GDF. As security officers entered to escort her to her new quarters, Maya caught her reflection in the room's polished wall. The woman looking back at her didn't look like much. Average height, dark hair that needed cutting, clothes that had seen better days. But something in her eyes had changed. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from something. She was moving toward it. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it made her wonder what kind of monster they thought she could become, and why that possibility didn't frighten her as much as it should have. The corridor ahead stretched long and bright, leading away from everything she'd ever known and toward a future that promised to remake her into something unprecedented. As her escorts guided her forward, Maya realized she was no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She was eager for it. The training facility existed in a space between worlds, literally. Maya learned this during her first briefing as she stared through the massive viewport at the swirling colors of hyperspace. The station had no fixed location, moving constantly through dimensions that hurt her brain to think about. It was the perfect place to create weapons that nobody wanted their enemies to know about. "Welcome to Project Nexus," announced Director Caney, a human woman whose cybernetic implants suggested she'd been through the program herself years ago. "You are one of 12 candidates selected from across the galaxy. Only one of you will graduate." Maya studied her fellow candidates as they stood in formation. There was Thresh, a massive reptilian Krex warrior whose species was known for their berserker rage. Beside him stood Zara 9, a synthetic being whose crystalline structure could reshape itself at will. Each candidate represented the pinnacle of their species' combat potential. She was the only human. "The next 6 months will break you down to your core components and rebuild you into something new," Director Caney continued. "Those who cannot adapt will be recycled." Questions? A towering insectoid raised one of its forearms. "What is the purpose of this weapon we are to become?" Caney's expression didn't change. "To end wars before they begin. To be the threat that makes threats unnecessary. To stand apart from everything the galaxy considers normal, so that normal can continue to exist." The first month nearly killed her. Physical conditioning pushed every candidate beyond their natural limits, assisted by medical technology that kept them conscious through pain that should have induced shock. Maya watched 3 candidates wash out in the first week alone, their minds unable to cope with the systematic destruction of their previous selves. But she endured. While Thresh roared his fury and Zara 9 calculated optimal resistance strategies, Maya simply continued. When her muscles screamed and her lungs burned, she found the quiet place in her mind where emotions couldn't reach and kept moving forward. The second month introduced combat training unlike anything in standard military doctrine. They learned to fight with weapons that existed only in theory, studied tactics for battles that might never happen, practiced maneuvers designed for wars against enemies that hadn't been discovered yet. Maya excelled in ways that disturbed her instructors. During a simulation involving hostage rescue, she identified the optimal solution within seconds, a plan that saved the most lives while completing the mission objectives. The problem was that her plan required sacrificing 2 team members, a calculation she made without hesitation. Candidate 07, Director Caney called her aside after the exercise. "Explain your reasoning." 2 deaths versus 18 lives saved and mission success, Maya replied. The mathematics were simple. And the emotional cost? Maya considered the question. Irrelevant to the objective. Something flickered in Caney's augmented eyes. "You understand that the 2 team members would be sentient beings with families, dreams, fears?" "Yes. And that knowledge doesn't affect your decision?" "Should it?" Maya asked genuinely. "If I let emotion cloud tactical judgment, more people die. The mission fails. The greater harm occurs because I prioritized my feelings over effective action." Caney was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, Report to advanced protocol training tomorrow. Skip the intermediate levels. By the third month, only 5 candidates remained. The training had evolved beyond physical and tactical skills into something deeper and more unsettling. They were taught to think in ways that bypassed normal psychological constraints, to make decisions that healthy minds would refuse to consider. Maya found herself adapting to each new lesson with frightening ease. When they learned to interrogate prisoners using methods that exploited species-specific psychological weaknesses, she absorbed the techniques without the revulsion that plagued the others. When they studied how to destroy entire civilizations through strategic manipulation rather than direct force, she saw elegant patterns where others saw horror. The other candidates began to avoid her. During their rare recreational periods, conversations would stop when she approached. Even Thresh, whose species respected strength above all else, seemed uncomfortable in her presence. "You're becoming something unnatural," Zara 9 told her one evening as they maintained their equipment. The synthetic's voice carried harmonics that suggested genuine concern. "The rest of us struggle with these lessons because we retain core aspects of who we were. You embrace them as if you never had those limitations." Maya looked up from cleaning her sidearm. "Perhaps I never did. That's what frightens me." The 4th month brought the first real test. Each candidate was given command of a small fleet and tasked with resolving a border conflict between 2 allied species. The simulation was based on a real situation that had occurred decades earlier, with all the political complexity and moral ambiguity intact. Maya studied the parameters for 3 days before acting. While the other candidates attempted diplomatic solutions or tried to broker ceasefires, she identified the root cause of the conflict, a trade agreement that benefited both species' leadership while impoverishing their populations. Her solution was elegant in its brutality. She orchestrated the exposure of the corrupt leadership on both sides, ensuring their public disgrace and removal from power. The revelation sparked civil unrest that temporarily destabilized both civilizations, but ultimately led to new governments that resolved the border dispute peacefully. The cost was minimal, perhaps 1,000 deaths during the transition period. Compared to the projected millions who would have died in the extended war, her solution prevented. "Brilliant," Director Caney observed as they reviewed the simulation results. "Morally questionable, but brilliant. You achieved the optimal outcome by accepting short-term chaos to prevent long-term catastrophe." "The math was simple," Maya replied. "Sacrifice the few to save the many. Accept temporary pain to prevent permanent suffering. And you feel no regret about the deaths your actions caused?" Maya considered the question carefully. "I feel satisfaction that the objective was achieved with minimal loss of life. Is that regret?" Caney's expression suggested she wasn't sure if Maya's response was promising or terrifying. By the 5th month, only Maya and Thresh remained. The Krex warrior had proven remarkably adaptable, his natural aggression channeled into strategic thinking that complemented his combat skills. But he still retained the emotional connections that made him recognizably himself. Maya had left those connections behind somewhere in the depths of training. She could remember having feelings about things, but they seemed distant now, like memories from someone else's life. The change should have bothered her, but it didn't. It simply was. "Tomorrow begins the final evaluation," Director Caney announced as they stood in the observation deck, watching stars wheel by in normal space. "One of you will become Nexus Protocol. The other will be retired." Thresh's reptilian features twisted into what might have been concern. "What does retired mean?" Caney's smile was sharp. "It means you know too much to return to normal military service and too little to serve the purpose for which you were trained." Maya understood. They would be terminated, their knowledge too dangerous to allow them to live with failure. The realization sparked no fear, only a mild curiosity about whether she would be able to eliminate Thresh before the evaluation ended. She suspected she would. The thought brought her the closest thing to happiness she'd felt in months. The final evaluation began with what appeared to be a simple mission briefing. Maya and Thresh stood in the war room as holographic displays painted a picture of crisis. In the Outer Rim, a species called the Veth had declared independence from the Galactic Council and were mobilizing their considerable military forces to defend their secession. "Your mission," Director Caney explained, "is to end this conflict with minimal loss of life and restore stability to the region. You have complete autonomy in methods and resources. The only requirement is success. Maya studied the tactical displays while Thresh examined troop movements and fleet positions. The Veth were formidable opponents. Their technology was nearly equal to the GDF's, and their homeworld was a fortress that had never been successfully invaded. Conventional military wisdom suggested a prolonged siege or negotiations that could drag on for years. Timeline? Thresh asked, his tactical mind already working through the logistics of various assault scenarios. 72 hours, Caney replied. After that, the Council will implement their own solution, which involves orbital bombardment of civilian populations. Maya felt a familiar stirring in her mind, the cold clarity that came when presented with an impossible problem. She began seeing connections and possibilities that weren't immediately obvious, patterns within patterns that most minds couldn't process. I'll need access to intelligence files on Veth leadership, she said. Complete psychological profiles, personal histories, family connections. Also economic data for the past 50 years and detailed analysis of their military command structure. Thresh looked at her with something approaching respect. Thinking beyond the battlefield? The battlefield is just the visible surface, Maya replied. Real wars are won in the spaces between obvious moves. She spent the next 18 hours absorbing information at a rate that impressed even the enhanced learning systems. The Veth were a proud species with a complex honor culture built around family loyalty and personal achievement. Their society was stratified but merit-based, with significant social mobility for those who proved themselves worthy. More importantly, their declaration of independence wasn't driven by ideology or resource disputes. It was a response to a series of trade agreements that had systematically undermined their traditional economy. The Veth leadership genuinely believed the Galactic Council was trying to destroy their culture through economic warfare, while Thresh developed conventional military strategies involving fleet, movements, and ground assaults. Maya crafted something far more subtle and devastating. The first phase began 36 hours into the evaluation. Maya, working through carefully constructed proxy channels, began spreading information throughout Veth communication networks. The data appeared to be leaked intelligence documents proving that the economic policies affecting their world had been implemented at the request of competing species who wanted to eliminate Veth influence in their sector. The information was almost entirely fabricated, but it was constructed with such careful attention to detail that it appeared completely authentic. Maya had spent hours studying Veth psychological profiles to understand exactly how they would react to betrayal by specific council members. Within 6 hours, Veth public opinion had shifted from anti-council sentiment to rage directed at particular species and individuals. More importantly, their leadership began questioning which of their traditional allies could be trusted. The second phase exploited the growing paranoia. Maya arranged for intercepted communications between various Veth military commanders to be discovered by their own intelligence services. These messages suggested that some factions within the Veth military were planning to surrender key, strategic positions in exchange for favorable treatment after the war. The communications were complete fabrications, but they were crafted to exploit existing rivalries and suspicions within the Veth command structure. Maya had identified which officers disliked each other, which families had historical grievances, and which military units had competing loyalties. The result was predictable and devastating. Veth forces began turning on each other as commanders tried to prevent their rivals from betraying the cause. Their unified defense collapsed into internal conflict as trust disintegrated throughout their command structure. Thresh watched the developments with growing unease. "You're destroying them from within," he observed, without firing a shot. "Violence is inefficient," Maya replied as she monitored the chaos spreading through Veth space. "Why accept casualties when superior strategy can achieve the same result?" But the deception, the manipulation. Maya looked at him with something approaching curiosity. "You disapprove?" "I understand the effectiveness," Thresh said carefully. "But my people value honor in combat. This feels wrong." "Wrong is irrelevant," Maya replied. "Only results matter." The third phase began 54 hours into the evaluation. With the Veth military structure collapsing and their society fracturing along manufactured divisions, Maya introduced her final element. She arranged for evidence to surface suggesting that the entire independence movement had been orchestrated by an external enemy seeking to weaken both the Veth and the Galactic Council. This evidence pointed to the hegemony, an aggressive empire on the galactic rim that everyone knew was expansionist and predatory. The proof was circumstantial but compelling, designed to redirect Veth anger away from the Council and toward a genuine external threat. Within hours, Veth leadership was requesting emergency council support to defend against what they now believed was a hegemony plot to destroy them. Their independence movement collapsed as survival instincts overrode political grievances. The entire conflict ended 68 hours into the evaluation period. The Veth not only returned to council membership, but requested permanent GDF protection against future hegemony aggression. No shots had been fired, no battles fought, no casualties taken on either side. Maya had achieved complete victory through pure manipulation and strategic deception. Director Caney reviewed the results in silence, while Thresh stared at the tactical displays showing Veth forces standing down and requesting council assistance. The Krex warrior's expression suggested he was struggling to process what he had witnessed. Remarkable, Caney finally said. You identified the psychological pressure points of an entire species and exploited them with surgical precision. The Veth leadership believes they made all these decisions independently. They did, Maya replied. I simply provided them with information that led them to the optimal conclusions. Information that was largely fabricated. Information that served the mission objectives while minimizing harm to all parties involved. Thresh found his voice. But the deception, the lies, how do we know they won't discover the truth? Maya turned to look at him with the same expression she might use when examining an interesting but irrelevant specimen. They won't look for truth that contradicts their survival needs. The hegemony is a real threat, so focusing their attention there serves their interests. The Council benefits from their renewed loyalty. Everyone gets what they need, except the truth. Truth is a luxury, Maya said. Survival is a necessity. I gave them both. Caney made notes on her tablet while observing both candidates. Maya could see the evaluation process continuing in the director's augmented eyes, calculating factors that went beyond tactical success. Candidate 07, Caney said finally. Your solution was flawless in execution and optimal in results. You achieved total victory with 0 casualties and created a stable outcome that benefits all legitimate parties. Maya nodded, accepting the assessment as simple fact. However, Caney continued, your methods raise questions about the weapon we are creating. You showed no hesitation in deceiving an entire species, no concern for the ethical implications of your actions, no empathy for those you manipulated. Should I have? Maya asked genuinely. Would hesitation, concern, or empathy have improved the outcome? The question hung in the air between them. Finally, Thresh spoke up. I could not have done what she did, he said quietly. Not because I lacked the intelligence, but because something inside me would have resisted. She has no such limitations. Caney nodded slowly. That is exactly what makes her either perfect for this program or completely unsuitable for it. Maya waited for the decision, feeling nothing but mild curiosity about the outcome. She had performed optimally. Whether that was sufficient would be determined by others, and their decision would be based on factors beyond her control. She was ready for either result. The decision came 12 hours later in the form of a single word transmitted to Maya's personal communicator. Proceed. She found Thresh in the facility's small recreation area, staring out at the swirling patterns of hyperspace. The Krex warrior's massive frame seemed smaller than usual, as if the weight of understanding what Maya had become had physically diminished him. I expected to feel anger, he said without turning around. My people honor strength, and you proved yourself stronger than I could ever be. But instead I feel relieved. Maya settled into a chair nearby, studying his reflection in the viewport. Relief is logical. You retain the ability to function in normal society. That has value, and you don't. No, Maya said simply. I don't think I ever did. They sat in silence for several minutes before Thresh spoke again. What will happen to me? Director Caney will offer you a position in strategic planning. Your tactical abilities combined with your retained moral framework make you valuable for conventional operations. Maya had analyzed the patterns of previous evaluations and understood the facility's resource management strategies. You'll have a good career. Thresh turned to look at her directly. How do you know this? Because it's the optimal use of your capabilities. Waste is inefficient. And what will happen to you? Maya considered the question. Based on her analysis of Project Nexus documentation and the facility's underlying purpose, she could extrapolate her future with reasonable accuracy. I'll become what they designed me to become, she said. A weapon that exists outside normal military structure. Someone who can make decisions that others can't, take actions that others won't, achieve objectives that others consider impossible. That sounds lonely. Maya examined the concept of loneliness, turning it over in her mind like a foreign object. Loneliness requires emotional attachment to others. I'm not certain I experience that anymore. Does that concern you? Should it? Thresh studied her face for a long moment. I think the fact that you can ask that question so calmly is the most terrifying thing about you. The next morning brought new briefings and a dramatic change in Maya's status. She was no longer Candidate 07 but Agent Nexus, reporting directly to the highest levels of GDF command. Her new quarters were larger and more comfortable, though she noticed the absence of certain amenities. No outside communication access, no personal effects, nothing that might create emotional connections to her past life. Director Caney explained her new role during a private meeting in her office. The walls were covered with star charts marking conflict zones, trade disputes, and potential crisis points throughout the galaxy. Agent Nexus, your function is to resolve problems that cannot be addressed through conventional means. You will operate with complete autonomy and virtually unlimited resources. Your only constraint is that your actions must ultimately serve humanity's long-term interests within the galactic community. Maya studied the star charts, already identifying patterns and potential interventions. What kind of problems? Wars that need to end quickly, diplomatic crises that threaten stability, emerging threats that require unconventional responses. Caney touched a control that highlighted several systems in red. Currently, we're tracking 47 situations that may require your attention. Prioritization criteria, threat level to human interests, potential for escalation, and window of opportunity for intervention. Caney handed her a data tablet containing detailed briefings. Your first assignment involves a trade war in the Centauri sector that's threatening to destabilize the entire region's economy. Maya absorbed the information quickly. 2 major trading species were locked in an increasingly hostile economic conflict over mining rights to a series of asteroid fields. Neither side was willing to compromise, and their dispute was beginning to affect shipping routes and supply chains throughout the sector. Standard diplomatic solutions? Maya asked. Attempted for 6 months without success. The Council is considering military intervention to enforce a settlement. But that would set a dangerous precedent and likely make both species resistant to future cooperation. Maya could see the problem's structure clearly. Both species were economically dependent on the disputed resources, but their positions were driven more by pride and political pressure than actual necessity. The solution required removing those psychological factors while providing face-saving alternatives. Timeline: 2 weeks before the Council votes on military intervention. Maya spent 3 days analyzing every aspect of the conflict before implementing her solution. Unlike the Veth situation, this required a more subtle approach that couldn't rely on external threats or manufactured crises. Instead, she focused on creating new information that would reshape how both species understood their situation. Working through carefully constructed intermediaries, she arranged for independent economic analysis to surface, showing that the disputed asteroid fields contained significantly less valuable resources than originally estimated. The analysis was technically accurate but incomplete. It focused on easily extractable materials while ignoring deeper deposits that would be profitable with advanced mining technology. Maya ensured that this limitation wasn't immediately obvious to either species' economic advisors. Simultaneously, she arranged for information about a newly discovered asteroid field in an unclaimed system to reach both species' intelligence networks. This field actually existed and contained resources far more valuable than the disputed territory, but its location had been classified by GDF survey teams. The combination of reduced value for the disputed territory and the availability of superior alternatives shifted the entire dynamic of the conflict. Within a week, both species were quietly exploring ways to end their dispute so they could focus on claiming the newly available Resources. Maya's final intervention involved ensuring that both species would claim different portions of the new asteroid field, preventing future conflicts while giving them access to resources that would make them more prosperous than the original disputed territory ever could have. The trade war ended with a formal treaty that both sides proclaimed as a victory. Neither species realized that their decisions had been influenced by carefully manipulated information, and both achieved better outcomes than continuing the conflict would have provided. Director Caney reviewed the results with obvious satisfaction. Elegant, efficient, and completely invisible. Both species believed they made optimal independent decisions. They did, Maya replied. I simply ensured they had access to information that led to those decisions. Information that you controlled and shaped to achieve your desired outcome. Information that led to the outcome most beneficial for all parties involved. Caney made notes on her evaluation tablet. The council is extremely pleased with these results. They're already preparing additional assignments for you. Maya nodded, feeling the familiar satisfaction of successful problem-solving. Are there any constraints on my methods? Only that your actions must ultimately benefit humanity's position in the galactic community. Beyond that, you have complete discretion. And if optimal solutions require actions that others might consider morally questionable, Caney's expression didn't change. Your moral framework is your responsibility, Agent Nexus. The Council trusts your judgment to achieve necessary results. Maya understood. She had been created to make decisions that others couldn't make, to cross lines that others wouldn't cross. Her purpose was to be the weapon that allowed humanity to thrive in a galaxy full of more powerful and established species. The thought should have been disturbing. Instead, it felt like coming home. Over the following months, Maya resolved 17 different crises using methods that ranged from subtle information warfare to complex psychological manipulation. Each success reinforced her value to the GDF and her separation from normal human society. She prevented 3 wars, ended 2 economic blockades, and neutralized a terrorist organization that had been planning attacks on human colonies. In every case, her solutions were efficient, effective, and completely hidden from public knowledge. But with each mission, Maya could feel herself changing further. The analytical distance that made her so effective was expanding, creating space between her and everything that might once have mattered to her. She was becoming exactly what Project Nexus had intended, a perfect weapon with a human face. The only question that remained was whether humanity would be able to control what they had created. The message that changed everything arrived through encrypted channels during Maya's off-duty hours. She was reviewing psychological profiles of a separatist movement in the Tau Ceti system when her secure communicator chimed with an urgent priority signal. Agent Nexus. Director Caney's voice carried intention Maya had never heard before. Report to Briefing Room Alpha immediately. Code Black authorization. Code Black meant an existential threat to humanity itself. Maya had never encountered one in her 18 months as an active agent, though she'd studied theoretical scenarios during training. She arrived at the briefing room to find Caney waiting with Admiral Harris, the highest-ranking human in the GDF, and Commander Vexhai, who had recruited her so long ago. The presence of such senior officials confirmed the severity of whatever crisis had emerged. Agent Nexus, Admiral Harris began without preamble. We have a situation that requires your unique capabilities. 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected evidence of an approaching fleet from outside the galaxy. Maya processed this information quickly. Extragalactic contact. Estimated technological level? Unknown. But preliminary analysis suggests capabilities significantly beyond anything in current galactic civilization. Commander Vexhai activated a holographic display showing sensor data. The fleet consists of approximately 10,000 vessels of varying sizes, all using propulsion and energy signatures we cannot identify. Estimated time to arrival? 6 months to the galactic border, 12 months to reach inhabited systems. Maya studied the data streams, her mind automatically calculating response scenarios. First contact protocols? That's the problem, Admiral Harris said grimly. This isn't first contact. We've identified the energy signatures. This fleet belongs to the Devourers. The name meant nothing to Maya, but she could see recognition and fear in the other officers' expressions. Explain. Director Caney took over the briefing. The Devourers are a legend among the older galactic species. According to historical records going back millions of years, they're a nomadic civilization that travels between galaxies, consuming all biological life they encounter before moving on. Most species considered them mythology, Vexhai added, stories told to explain the disappearance of ancient civilizations. But the energy signatures matched descriptions in the oldest archived records. Maya absorbed this information while analyzing the strategic implications. Military response capabilities? None, Admiral Harris said bluntly. If the historical accounts are accurate, the Devourers have technology that makes our most advanced weapons look like stone tools. Every species that has tried to fight them has been completely annihilated. Then why am I here? The three officers exchanged glances before Caney answered. Because conventional military and diplomatic solutions are impossible. We need someone who can think beyond normal parameters, who can find solutions that others can't even imagine. Maya understood. They were asking her to solve a problem that had no solution, to find a way to save galactic civilization from an enemy that had never been defeated. It was exactly the kind of impossible challenge that Project Nexus had trained her to handle. What resources are available? Everything, Admiral Harris said. Complete access to all GDF military assets. Unrestricted authority to implement any strategy you develop, unlimited budget for research and development. And timeline? You have 11 months to develop and implement a solution. After that, the Devourers reach the first inhabited systems and begin their consumption pattern. Maya spent the next 72 hours absorbing every piece of available information about the Devourers. The historical records were fragmentary and often contradictory, but certain patterns emerged from the ancient accounts. The Devourers weren't just conquerors. They were literally consumers of biological life. Their technology apparently allowed them to harvest and process organic matter on a planetary scale, stripping entire worlds of all living creatures while leaving the planets themselves intact but lifeless. More disturbing was the suggestion that they didn't just kill their victims but somehow preserved their consciousness, adding the accumulated knowledge and experiences of consumed species to their collective intelligence. If true, this meant that the Devourers grew stronger and more knowledgeable with each galaxy they consumed. The tactical challenge was unlike anything Maya had encountered. How do you fight an enemy that has the accumulated knowledge of millions of destroyed civilizations? How do you defeat technology that has been refined through countless intergalactic campaigns? Conventional military action was clearly futile. Diplomatic contact was impossible with entities that viewed all biological life as food. Economic or political manipulation had no meaning for a nomadic species that took what they needed by force. Maya needed a different approach entirely. She began by analyzing the Devourers from a biological and evolutionary perspective. No species, regardless of their technological advancement, could maintain their capabilities without some form of resource base. The Devourers had to have limitations, vulnerabilities, needs that could be exploited. The fact that they consumed biological life suggested that they required organic matter for some essential function. Perhaps they had evolved beyond normal biology, but still needed living organisms to maintain their technology or enhance their collective intelligence. More importantly, their nomadic pattern suggested they couldn't remain in one galaxy indefinitely. Something forced them to move on after consuming available resources, which meant their technology had limits. Maya spent weeks developing theories and testing them against the available data. Gradually, a picture emerged of the Devourers' probable nature and potential weaknesses. They were likely a hybrid biological-technological civilization that had transcended normal evolutionary limitations by incorporating the genetic and intellectual resources of consumed species. Their technology was probably organic-based, grown rather than manufactured, which explained its superiority over purely mechanical systems. But this strength was also their weakness. Organic technology required biological resources to maintain and expand. The Devourers consumed galaxies not just for conquest but out of necessity. They needed the biological diversity and complexity of living worlds to fuel their continued existence. Maya's solution began to take shape around this understanding. If the Devourers required biological complexity to maintain their civilization, then the key was not to fight them directly, but to deny them what they needed while providing an alternative that served their purposes without requiring the destruction of galactic civilization. The plan she developed was audacious even by her standards. Instead of trying to defeat the Devourers, she would attempt to redirect them toward a different source of biological complexity, one that could satisfy their needs without destroying existing life. Working with the GDF's most advanced research teams, Maya began developing technology to create artificial biological complexity on a scale that would rival entire ecosystems. Using quantum matter manipulation and advanced genetic engineering, they would construct worlds filled with synthetic organisms that possessed all the complexity and diversity of natural life but existed solely to be consumed. The Devourers would be offered a deal: unlimited access to artificially generated biological complexity in exchange for leaving natural civilizations alone. These synthetic worlds would be positioned at the galaxy's edge, providing the Devourers with what they needed, while allowing them to move on to their next destination without consuming inhabited systems. But first, Maya had to make contact with the Devourers and convince them that her proposal was in their interests. This required developing communication technology that could reach across interstellar distances and translating concepts that had no equivalent in normal language. The most challenging aspect was determining how to present the offer. The Devourers had never negotiated with their prey before, and Maya had to craft her message in terms that would appeal to entities whose intelligence encompassed millions of consumed civilizations. As her plan took shape, Maya realized she was essentially offering to feed the galaxy's greatest predator in exchange for humanity's survival. The moral implications were staggering. She was potentially condemning synthetic life forms to consumption to save natural ones. But the mathematics were simple. Synthetic organisms designed specifically for consumption versus the extinction of all biological life in the galaxy. The choice was clear, even if others might find it morally troubling. Maya had learned long ago that optimal solutions often required accepting costs that others wouldn't consider. This was simply another application of that principle on a galactic scale. The only question was whether the Devourers would be interested in her proposal, or if they would simply consume her message along with everything else in their path. The first response from the Devourers arrived 7 months after Maya had transmitted her proposal. The message came in the form of a data stream that required 3 days to fully decode, containing layers of meaning that suggested intelligence beyond anything the galaxy had previously encountered. Maya stood in the secure communication chamber, watching as translation algorithms struggled to render the Devourer response into comprehensible terms. When the final interpretation appeared on her displays, she felt something that might have been excitement for the first time in months. They were interested. The message was complex, containing detailed analysis of Maya's proposal, along with counteroffers and modifications that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of galactic civilization. The Devourers had apparently studied intercepted communications and cultural databases during their approach, learning about the species they intended to consume. More unsettling was their obvious knowledge of Maya herself. The message contained references to her psychological profile, her tactical methods, and even specific details about Project Nexus that should have been classified beyond their reach. "How much do they know about us?" Director Caney asked as they reviewed the communication together. "Everything that matters," Maya replied, highlighting relevant sections of the decoded message. "They've been monitoring our transmissions and analyzing our technology since entering the galaxy. Their intelligence capabilities exceed our estimates." The Devourer response revealed disturbing insights into their nature. They weren't mindless consumers, but highly sophisticated entities who had absorbed the knowledge and creativity of countless civilizations. They understood art, philosophy, science, and culture. They simply viewed biological life as a resource to be harvested rather than preserved. Their counter-proposal was elegant and terrifying. They would accept Maya's offer of synthetic biological complexity, but with modifications that would ensure optimal efficiency. Instead of consuming artificial worlds at the galaxy's edge, they wanted to establish permanent harvesting facilities within inhabited systems. These facilities would continuously generate complex synthetic organisms using matter drawn from uninhabited planets and asteroids. The process would provide the Devourers with their required biological resources, while allowing natural civilizations to continue existing as sources of ongoing creativity and innovation. The proposal was essentially sustainable consumption. The devourers would feed on artificial complexity, while allowing natural life to evolve and develop new forms of biological organization that could be replicated in their synthetic feeding systems. Maya analyzed the implications quickly. The arrangement would allow galactic civilization to survive, but under permanent oversight by entities that viewed them as interesting animals to be preserved for their useful output. "It's a cage," Admiral Harris said when she briefed the senior command staff. "They're offering to keep us alive as long as we remain useful to them." "Yes," Maya agreed, "but it's survival. The alternative is extinction." "There has to be another option," Commander Vex High protested. "Some way to fight them or drive them away." Maya had spent months analyzing every possible alternative. Their technology surpasses ours by orders of magnitude. Their collective intelligence incorporates the knowledge of millions of consumed civilizations. Direct confrontation would result in complete annihilation. "And you're comfortable with condemning galactic civilization to permanent servitude?" Maya considered the question. "I'm comfortable with ensuring the continued existence of biological life and cultural development, even under constrained circumstances. The alternative is non-existence." She could see the conflict in their expressions, the natural desire to fight for freedom warring against the logical understanding that resistance meant death. It was exactly the kind of decision that Project Nexus had designed her to make without emotional interference. "What are the terms of their offer?" Admiral Harris asked finally. Maya activated the detailed analysis she'd prepared. "The Devourers will establish harvesting facilities in 12 uninhabited systems throughout the galaxy. These facilities will generate synthetic biological complexity, using matter from local asteroids and dead planets. In exchange, all natural biological civilizations will be permitted to continue their development under Devourer observation." Observation? "They want to study our continued evolution and cultural advancement. New biological innovations and creative developments will be incorporated into their synthetic systems, improving the quality of their harvest." Caney frowned at the implications. "We become permanent test subjects." "We become partners in a mutually beneficial arrangement," Maya corrected. "They gain sustainable access to biological complexity. We gain protection from extinction and freedom to develop within defined parameters." "What kind of parameters?" Maya highlighted another section of the Devourer message. "No military action against their facilities. No attempts to interfere with their harvesting operations. No development of technologies that could threaten their civilization. Regular cultural and scientific exchanges to facilitate their understanding of our continued development." The terms were comprehensive and non-negotiable. The Devourers had clearly thought through every aspect of the arrangement, anticipating potential problems and establishing safeguards to protect their interests. "Timeline for implementation?" Admiral Harris asked. 6 weeks. If we accept their terms, they'll begin establishing facilities immediately. If we reject them, they'll proceed with traditional consumption patterns. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of deciding the future of galactic civilization. Maya waited patiently while the senior officers processed the magnitude of the choice before them. Finally, Commander Vex High spoke. "What's your recommendation, Agent Nexus?" Maya had known this moment would come, the point where others would rely on her judgment to make a decision that normal minds couldn't handle. "Acceptance is optimal. The arrangement preserves biological life and cultural development while satisfying devourer requirements. Long-term outcomes are significantly better than any alternative scenario. Even though it means permanent subjugation, subjugation implies unwilling servitude. This is a negotiated partnership with mutually beneficial terms. The Devourers gain what they need without the energy cost of constant warfare. We gain protection and stability within a framework that allows continued growth." Admiral Harris leaned back in his chair, looking older than Maya had ever seen him. "You're asking us to surrender the galaxy's freedom. I'm recommending that we choose survival with constraints over extinction with honor," Maya replied. "The mathematics are simple. And you feel no conflict about this decision?" Maya examined the question carefully. "I feel satisfaction that an optimal solution has been identified. Conflict would not improve the outcome." She could see them struggling with concepts that seemed clear to her. They were still thinking in terms of freedom versus slavery, independence versus subjugation. Maya saw only successful problem resolution using available resources to achieve the best possible outcome under existing constraints. The meeting continued for 3 more hours as the senior staff explored every alternative and implication. Maya answered their questions with patient precision, explaining the logical framework that made acceptance the only viable choice. When the final vote was taken, the decision was unanimous. The Galactic Defense Force would accept the Devourer proposal and recommend its adoption by the full Council. Maya felt the familiar satisfaction of successful mission completion. She had solved an impossible problem and saved galactic civilization from extinction. The fact that the solution required accepting permanent oversight by superior entities was simply another constraint to be managed. As the senior officers filed out to begin implementation procedures, Director Caney remained behind with Maya. "Do you ever wonder what you've become?" Caney asked quietly. Maya considered the question. "I've become what I was designed to become. A tool for solving problems that others cannot solve. And you're satisfied with that? Satisfaction is irrelevant. Function is what matters." Caney studied her for a long moment. "Sometimes I wonder if we created the perfect weapon or the perfect monster." Maya met her gaze steadily. "Perhaps those are the same thing." As she left the briefing room to begin coordinating with Devourer representatives, Maya reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate young woman who had volunteered for military service to escape poverty, to the perfect weapon who had just negotiated the survival of galactic civilization, she had indeed stood apart from everything humanity considered normal. And in doing so, she had become exactly what the galaxy needed her to be. 5 years after the first Devourer harvesting facility came online, Maya stood on the observation deck of Research Station Omega, watching the artificial ecosystem pulse with synthetic life. The facility sprawled across an entire moon, its biomanufacturing complexes generating organisms of stunning complexity and beauty, creatures that existed solely to be consumed. The arrangement had worked exactly as she'd predicted. Galactic civilization thrived under Devourer protection, free from war and resource conflicts. Trade flourished, scientific advancement accelerated, and cultural exchange reached unprecedented levels. The price was their freedom to choose their own destiny. But most citizens had adapted to the new reality with surprising ease. Maya had become the primary liaison between humanity and the Devourers, a role that suited her perfectly. She understood both species' motivations and could translate between their vastly different perspectives on existence. To the Devourers, she was a fascinating example of directed evolution, a biological entity that had transcended normal emotional limitations to achieve pure functional efficiency. To humanity, she was something more complex and unsettling. "The Council is concerned about the latest Devourer requests," Director Caney said as she joined Maya at the viewport. After 5 years of working together, Caney had aged noticeably while Maya remained essentially unchanged. The enhancement procedures that had created Agent Nexus included life extension technologies that would keep her functional for centuries. "Specify concerns," Maya replied, watching a school of synthetic organisms that resembled living crystal formations drift through the facility's biozones. "They want access to human genetic templates for their next generation of synthetic creatures, not just DNA samples, complete psychological and neurological patterns." Maya had been expecting this request. The Devourers were always seeking to enhance the complexity of their synthetic organisms, and human consciousness represented a unique form of biological organization they hadn't fully replicated. "Logical progression," she said. "Their current synthetic organisms lack the cognitive complexity that makes natural life interesting to them. Human neural patterns would provide templates for more sophisticated artificial minds. Maya, they're asking to copy human consciousness and feed it to their machines. They're asking to replicate human cognitive patterns in synthetic organisms that will provide them with enhanced nutritional value," Maya corrected. "The distinction is important." Caney stared at her with an expression that had become familiar over the years, a mixture of respect, fear, and something approaching pity. "Do you hear yourself? You're talking about the industrial replication of human souls as if it's a manufacturing process." Maya turned to study Caney's face. analyzing the emotional responses that she had learned to recognize but no longer truly understood. You're experiencing distress because you anthropomorphize the synthetic organisms. You imagine them as equivalent to natural humans rather than seeing them as sophisticated biological machines. They would have human thoughts, human feelings, human dreams. How is that not equivalent to natural humans? Because they would exist for a specific purpose, to provide optimal nutritional complexity for devourer consumption. Their experiences would be designed to maximize their value as resources rather than developing naturally through interaction with their environment. Maya could see that her explanation wasn't reducing Kaney's distress. Over the years, she had noticed that her logical frameworks increasingly diverged from normal human emotional responses. The gap seemed to be widening rather than stabilizing. "The council wants your recommendation," Kaney said finally. Maya had already completed her analysis of the devourer request and its implications. Recommendation is acceptance with modifications. We provide genetic and neurological templates, but retain control over the psychological parameters of the synthetic organisms. This ensures they serve devourer needs while preventing the creation of fully conscious entities that might suffer during consumption. You want to create human-based synthetic life forms, specifically designed not to suffer when they're eaten. I want to optimize the arrangement for all parties involved. The devourers gain enhanced biological complexity. We maintain our partnership status by providing valuable resources. The synthetic organisms experience existence within parameters that don't include suffering or existential distress. Kaney was quiet for several minutes, watching the artificial ecosystem pulse with engineered life. Finally, she said, "Sometimes I wonder what the young woman who volunteered for military service would think of what you've become." Maya considered the question seriously. She could remember that young woman's thoughts and motivations, but they seemed distant and irrelevant to her current existence. She would probably be satisfied that her decision to join the military ultimately led to the survival of human civilization. Would she? Or would she be horrified by the person you've become? Horror is an emotional response to stimuli that conflict with existing moral frameworks, Maya replied. My moral framework has evolved to prioritize optimal outcomes over emotional comfort. Whether she would approve is irrelevant to the effectiveness of my function. Listen to yourself, Maya. You're talking about a person you used to be as if she was a different species. Maya paused, recognizing something important in Kaney's observation. Over the years, she had indeed become fundamentally different from normal humans. The process had been so gradual that she hadn't noticed the extent of her transformation. Perhaps I am a different species now, she said thoughtfully. Project Nexus was designed to create something that could function beyond human limitations. Evolution doesn't always preserve the original form. And that doesn't concern you? Maya examined her response to this possibility. Should it? I've become more effective at my function. I've solved problems that would have been impossible for normal human consciousness to address. I've saved galactic civilization from extinction and negotiated a stable long-term arrangement that benefits everyone involved. But at what cost? The cost was the person I used to be. The benefit was saving trillions of lives and preserving biological diversity throughout the galaxy. The mathematics favor the exchange. Kaney shook her head slowly. You've become exactly what the devourers find fascinating about you. A biological entity that has transcended normal emotional limitations to achieve pure efficiency. You're their proof that evolution can produce organisms that optimize for function over feeling. Maya considered this observation and found it accurate. If that's what was required to ensure humanity's survival, then it was a necessary adaptation. But Maya, if you're no longer human in any meaningful sense, then what have we really saved? The question struck something deep in Maya's consciousness, a level of awareness that hadn't been accessed in years. For a moment, she could almost remember what it felt like to experience concern, anxiety, hope, love. The memories were faint but persistent, like echoes from a previous existence. We saved the continuation of human biological and cultural development, she said finally. The form that development takes may not match previous patterns, but adaptation is essential for survival in changing environments. And if that adaptation means becoming something that no longer recognizes the value of human consciousness, except as a resource to be optimized, Maya felt something that might have been uncertainty, a rare experience for her current consciousness. Then we will have become what we needed to become to survive. Evolution doesn't preserve the past when it conflicts with the future. She turned back to the viewport, watching the synthetic organisms drift through their carefully controlled environment. Each creature was perfectly designed for its purpose, existing without suffering or uncertainty, fulfilling its function with elegant efficiency. Perhaps, she said quietly, that's not entirely a loss. As Director Caney left the observation deck, Maya remained alone with her thoughts. In the artificial ecosystem below, synthetic life continued its purpose-driven existence. Above her, stars wheeled in patterns that the Devourers had seen in countless other galaxies. She had indeed stood apart from everything humanity considered normal. In doing so, she had become the most dangerous weapon her species had ever created. Not because she could destroy their enemies, but because she could sacrifice anything, including her own humanity, to ensure their survival. Whether that made her humanity's savior or its final victim was a question she was no longer capable of answering. Perhaps that, too, was part of what made her so effective. The mathematics of survival didn't require her to understand what she had lost. They only required her to continue functioning, optimizing, solving the impossible, problems that allowed life to persist in an indifferent universe. Maya watched the synthetic organisms, danced their programmed patterns, and felt nothing but satisfaction at their efficient design. It was enough. It had to be enough, after all. She was exactly what humanity needed her to be.